We've interviewed a lot of people on this podcast, and we've noticed a shift towards Islam, especially among the entrepreneurial-minded people.
Yeah.
What do you think attracts them to the values of Islam?
I think nowadays we're kind of like in a very specific time in history. Like, there's the culture wars, and then within that there's the gender wars. I think that's what's going on. And Islam has a very strict stance on certain traditional issues, right? And I think a lot of people want the blunt truth on issues to do with gender and sexuality and all these kind of things, the family unit and these kind of things. And since Islam is a proselytizing religion, unlike, for example, Orthodox Judaism, which is a very similar religion in terms of what you'll find in laws and so on, it kind of appeals to that kind of subsection of society. So I do think that's part of the reason. And people like Andrew Tate, I mean, he's recently become Muslim. I've done a podcast with him. The reasons he cites are because of the very strong stances, very clear moral guidelines that Islam has to offer. A lot of other people talk about the fact that Islam talks about one God worthy of worship, and the central tenet of Islam is referred to as Tawheed, or monotheism, to believe in one God worthy of worship. And then all these other things, for example, a lot of the biblical prophets, Abraham, Moses, Jesus even, they are in the Quran. So it's not disfamiliar. It's not unfamiliar for people that come from Judeo-Christian backgrounds to embrace Islam and to believe in it. So I think that's probably the reason why. But we'd have to maybe do a study on it and ask them. But Andrew Tate, these are the reasons he gave.
I mean, we had Elfie Best on one of our podcasts, and he's what I would typically describe as a London geezer sort of lad, ducker and diver, and probably the last person you would expect to take on Islam as a religion. But he spoke very well of it. And I don't know if you've spoken to him, but what do you think would be the reason that would attract him?
I don't know much about him, to be completely honest with you, but Nietzsche, a very interesting philosopher. He was postmodern, like the father of postmodernism, and he was an atheist in his own right. And he actually had something to say about Islam, which I think is relevant to this discussion. And he was talking about Islam comparative to Christianity. Okay, and he was saying that he referred to Islam as a masculine religion. Okay, which is a very interesting kind of terminology. And he talked about the fact that Islam was a religion that kind of gave people a sense of masculinity, and he had some derogatory things to say about Christianity. In fact, one thing he talked about vis-a-vis Christianity is that he referred to as a slavish religion. If you think about Jesus Christ in Christianity, for example, he was crucified, he was resurrected. These are the central tenets of Christianity. And so from the perspective of Nietzsche, that's a losing battle. Like, if this was a story, he would have been a loser. This is a losing narrative, you see. In Islam, the narrative is not the same. We do have Jesus Christ, but he wasn't killed or crucified, so he was ascended. There is obviously the doctrine of ascension in Christianity as well. But if you look at the central figure of Islam, which is Muhammad, right? He went through a war, or a variety of wars, a series of wars, and at the end of it, he was victorious. And that's historically attested to. I mean, there's no controversy on that issue. And that's why Islam spread and so on. So Islam is a warrior religion in many ways, and it's unapologetically so. It's about expansion, it's about conquest and so on. And I think high testosterone men who want to win in life, they look at that and they say, well, what do I want to be? Do I want to be a winner? So what kind of virtues do I need? Bravery? Do I need, I don't like to use the word patriarchy because it has these connotations of exploitation, right? But we want to have a household where, there's a managerial hierarchy and the man is at the top of it, for example. Polygamy is obviously a big thing nowadays with the kind of red pill movement and so on, and things like that as well. So I think these things combined have made Islam a very attractive proposition to a certain group of people. But I think if you look at the stats anyway, Islam was a religion people were converting to in the United Kingdom. And I think it was the number one religion people were converting to. Ironically, the data that we have says that women were actually converting to it more than men, which is kind of interesting now because a lot of men are coming to Islam. The reason why, we don't know exactly what the reasons are, but because there isn't exact reasoning, I've looked at some of like the British attitude surveys and stuff like that. But I think the theological tenets, Like, for example, if you look at the Trinity, the idea of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit in Christianity, that the fact that Jesus is God and he's a man, compared to the fact that, you've got one God worthy of worship. He's not a man, he's not a child, he's not all of those things. That Jesus is the Messiah in Islam, but he's not a God. That we don't believe that anyone with a date of birth can ever be a God.
Is Jesus a God, or is he the Son of God?
So we don't. So Muslims don't believe he was the Son of God or God.
Okay.
We say that he was the Messiah, right? So he was the chosen person from God, and he was a mighty messenger sent from God. That he was actually this. He was born from the Virgin Mary, but that he wasn't God himself incarnate.
No.
And so a lot of people that leave Christianity can't make sense of the Trinity. They say, why is it that you have the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and they are three co-equal, co-eternal? How could it be that you have the Father is God, the Son is God, and the Holy Spirit is God, but there's not three gods, but one God? How does it compute? And so because people have become disillusioned with some of the key theological tenets of Christianity, and Islam is a natural next step from Christianity. In fact, it doesn't negate it. Like the Quran doesn't negate biblical prophets, as we mentioned, doesn't negate Jesus, doesn't negate Mary. A lot of people just say, okay, well, in that case, let's take a look at the Quran. Let's see what it's talking about. Let's see what kind of message is putting forward. And a lot of them become Muslim.